Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be responding to this video made by TMM. His video is actually a response to the video I made a few weeks ago where I argue that atheists cannot avoid self-contradiction. In order to have the proper context for what I'll be saying here, I suggest you watch my original video and his response to it, both of which I'll link in the description below. Now, there are a lot of things to address in TMM's response video, but I would not be nitpicking every single detail for the sake of brevity. Rather, I would be responding to the most important points which challenge the soundness of the argument I made in my original video. To make things easier, I'm going to be providing a formal argument which, while not made explicit in the original video, perfectly summarizes the argument I made there. Premise 1. If atheism is true, then there is no exhaustive predetermination of the facts of the temporal realm. Premise 2. If there is no exhaustive predetermination of the facts of the temporal realm, then every temporal fact is new. Premise 3. If every temporal fact is new, then every temporal fact is a brute fact. Premise 4. Therefore, if atheism is true, every temporal fact is a brute fact. Premise 5. To predicate intelligibly about reality requires a system of concepts. Premise 6. Concepts denote timeless relations between facts. Premise 7. If every temporal fact is brute, then no temporal fact is related to another temporal fact. Premise 8. Therefore, no concepts can apply to any temporal fact. Premise 9. Therefore, if atheism is true, no intelligible assertion can be made about temporal reality. And premise 10, therefore, all atheist thought and speech ends up in self-contradiction. The argument is pretty simple and can be boiled down to two stages. The first stage is where I argue that atheism entails that all the facts of reality are brute facts. And the second stage is where I argue that no intelligible assertions can be made about brute facts. And as such, the atheist contradicts his own commitments whenever he speaks, thinks, or argues. Premises 1 to 4 represent the first stage, while premises 5 to 10 are the second stage. The argument is valid, so all that's left is to establish the truth of the premises. I think my original video did that well, but TMM doesn't seem to think so, and based on what he has said in response, he would take issue with the number of premises in the argument, specifically premises 4 and 6. But first, there are premises he agrees with. For example, he agrees with the first premise when he says,
"While I don't believe that the universe was predetermined, because I don't see how it makes any sense to think of anything being pre-universe, it may very well still be deterministic."
Unfortunately, however, this is where our agreement ends. The bulk of his response is to repeatedly point out that atheists don't believe all facts are brute facts, and that order in reality does not require a rational will. He also frequently pointed out that concepts are neither timeless nor unchanging. These 2 points are the most substantial ones in the video since they constitute rejections of important premises in my argument, so I would be focusing my attention on them. When I stated that atheism implies that all facts are brute facts, TMM has this to say.
"While it looks very much to me like there is a non-random pattern to how many things occur, and thus I do not believe that every event is a wholly unique occurrence in this sense, I don't believe that the existence of such patterns are a plan. That is to say, I see no reason to believe that they were deliberately imposed by a conscious mind. I think events can unfold in an ordered manner without that order being externally imposed by a deliberate conscious mind. This dude's argument assumes that if non-random patterns of events exist, they must have been deliberately imposed by a rational will. This is a baseless assumption. There is no reason to assume that regularities, whether they be the laws of logic or the regularities described by the laws of physics, cannot exist without being imposed by a rational will. There is no contradiction in saying both that the universe was not designed by a rational will, and also saying that the universe behaves according to non-random patterns that can be understood. To believe otherwise is to make the entirely baseless baseless assumption that non-randomness cannot exist without being imposed by a rational will. There is no reason to believe that at all.
The issue here is that premise 4 of my argument, which states that if atheism is true, then all temporal facts are brute facts, is a conclusion, and therefore, in order to reject it, one must deny one of the premises it follows from. TMM has not done that. I did not just barely assert that all facts are brute given atheism. I inferred it from the premise that, given atheism, every fact is new. A premise which was in turn inferred from the premise that, given atheism, there is no exhaustive predetermination of all facts. A premise which, as I pointed out earlier, TMM agrees with. It is not enough for TMM to claim that non-random patterns can exist without the imposition of a rational will, or that order can obtain in an atheistic universe. He must address the argument to the contrary that I presented. To be fair, it could be that he missed the line of inference because I did not make it explicit in my original video. Or maybe he simply did not understand what I was arguing. So I'll try to flesh out the argument a bit more. TMM has already agreed that given atheism, there is no exhaustive predetermination of temporal facts. From this, it follows that every fact that is actualized in the temporal realm is new. What does it mean for a fact to be new? It means that the fact exists for the very first time. Take the example of a screenwriter who wrote the script for a movie that has just been produced and is premiering in cinemas. For the audience, the events of the movie's plot are a novelty. They are seeing it for the very first time. For the screenwriter, though, this isn't the case. Because he wrote the script, he already knows what will happen, and so the events are not new for him. The events of the plot occur according to his preconceived plan. On the theistic view, God has planned everything out. So ultimately, there is no novelty because God knows how the entirety of history will unfold. He planned it. Given theism, every fact exists, first and foremost, as an idea in the mind of God. Given atheism, though, there is no screenwriter, so everyone is witnessing the events of the temporal realm for the very first time. Everything is new in that sense. And if every fact is new, then every fact is brute. In order to be new, the facts cannot be part of a system prior to their instantiation in time. Because the events of a movie's plot were first conceived of in the mind of the writer, they are not new. The writer's plan constitutes the context or a system that relates the various events of the plot. Without that, we just have isolated and unrelated scenes or events. The same thing goes for the temporal realm. Because every event is a novelty, every event is unrelated to anything before or after it. The temporal world becomes a series of events which have no connection to one another. In order to be connected, there has to be a system which encompasses all of them and relates them even before they are actualized in time. But to have this would be the same as affirming exhaustive predetermination of history, something that we have already established is incompatible with atheism. So in order to reject premise 4, TMM would have to make an atheistic worldview consistent with the idea that history has been exhaustively predetermined by a rational will. Good luck with that. TMM's issue with the second stage comes in form of a rejection of premise 6. He says,
concepts are invented by people and can be and are revised by people. I'm not claiming to use a timeless system of concepts. I'm claiming to use a system of concepts that people have invented and can revise however they like, whenever they like. That's actually a great illustration of how you're wrong. The concept of red has changed. The reason we say people with red hair have red hair, despite the fact that it's clearly orange, is because orange used to be included in the concept of red. The concept of red has since narrowed. It has been revised. We still call people with red hair redheads, though, because that particular archaic use of the word has been grandfathered in.
But TMM is just confusing words with concepts here. Of course, Words can be used to convey concepts, but they are not themselves concepts. Oftentimes, our words fail to properly express the concept we want, and so we often revise our terminology in order to properly express the concepts we possess. Furthermore, when I talk about the timelessness or unchanging nature of concepts, I am referring specifically to their criteria of application. Criteria of application are things that must be the case for a concept to apply to an object. So for example, in order for something to be a dog, it must be a four-legged mammal, amongst other things. So having four legs and being a mammal are part of the criteria of application for the concept dog. Criteria of application are timeless and changeless. Four-legged mammal cannot be part of the criteria of application for the concept at one time, but not part of the criteria of application at another time. So in that sense, concepts are immutable and atemporal. With that said, TMM's two most pertinent criticisms of my argument have been answered. I really appreciate the fact that he took time to respond to my video. Part of the reasons I started this channel was to encourage rational discourse on these important issues, and I think this is a step in the right direction. If TMM wants to debate this issue further, whether formally or informally, I'm always available. With that said, see you next time.